the top piece of business advice almost everybody wants to give you is, focus on a niche. You don't need 10 million subscribers. There's almost no niche narrow enough. I'd be real worried about YouTube pushing further into that game. That alone trumps every podcast platform that I'm aware of. Would get people to start questioning their loyalty to their platforms. That's the whole game. I mean, people are tuning into you because they're getting value from you.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Creators Uncut. Super excited for another episode. Today we have a special guest. His name is Ryan Roghaar, and he is from the YouTube and podcast Eggs the Podcast. Ryan, thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely, Spencer. Thanks so much for having me here, man. I'm thrilled to death.
Yeah, I love getting to meet new people, and it's always nice to meet someone else who also does podcasting. They can kind of get the same idea of what work goes into it. But for our viewers who may not know you, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what Eggs the Podcast is about?
Sure. Well, so basically for the last 20-something years, I've been running marketing and design agencies. More recently, we pivoted in January to being a med device specific agency. So now we're a consultancy for med device and med tech. All those years, or for many of those years, I should say, I guess now we're going into year 9, I believe. 9 or 10. God, we might be hitting 10. We've been doing Eggs the Podcast. And so Eggs is a podcast where we interview startup founders, CEOs, honestly, everybody all the way down to like literal rock stars about what they, do for business or whatever. And the eggs that we refer to are sort of what we call the little learnings or the little nuggets that people leave behind as they develop a career. So one thing we've discovered, I mean, we're at 461, I think is the episode we dropped this week. And so over the course of these 460 episodes, the one thing we really noticed is that the creative thread that fuels a rock star, fuels an artist, fuels, basically any kind of creative person is the same fuel that creates great business people and all that stuff. It's just basically all how we apply our creative thread, right? So that's kind of what these eggs are, and we believe that basically every business person will have encountered some things along the way. And so we try and package them up in a nice shareable way where our listeners and listening audience more broadly can take those things and apply them in their own business.
Gotcha. That's awesome. That, for our viewers who haven't heard the podcast, definitely check it out. It kind of sounds similar to our podcast, but just like more on the business side of things, whereas we focus more on YouTube. But I like that. I like that, whatever makes a successful business is kind of equivalent to creators. So speaking of creators, you are one. You have a podcast, you have a YouTube channel. Kind of how did you get into the creator space? I know you mentioned you're in marketing. Was it because of that, or was it like something completely different?
Well, if we go all the way back to the beginning, what's funny? So my co-host on Eggs the Podcast, this guy, Mike Smith, is a club DJ. He does wedding DJs and all that kind of stuff too, but club party guy. And I came from sort of the marketing side, but both he and I shared a real love for music and entertainment. Back when I was younger, I used to road manage bands and things like that. So he and I are both, big music industry fans. And so we've always worked together as a good team. Basically I met him. He was running lights for one of the shows that we put on in another city that he was in. And so when we brought the band I was working with at the time through there, he happened to be the light guy. And so we met and we've been friends now, going on 20 years probably. And awesome. And so we started doing the show, or basically what came to a head is basically he was an audio engineer and I was a marketing guy. And the thought was, let's put together a show for the purpose of basically developing sort of expertise or becoming subject matter experts. And so if you go back, and we keep them up for posterity, but they're terrible. I actually don't encourage anyone to go back and listen to them. But the first 10 episodes of our show, before we introduced guests, were basically just like us with like a script and top 10 lists of things that we thought were important for marketing. And then we just kind of try and riff on them or whatever. So they're really painful to listen to. But the idea was that let's start developing a little bit of a reputation for being known in the space for a certain thing. So you mentioned earlier that our shows are kind of similar, but you guys focused on the YouTube space where we're focused more maybe on the business side. But what's interesting is that and this maybe is a broader conversation we can have, is around niching, right? And about sort of choosing your, niche or niche to appease everybody. Yeah. I tend to go niche, but I think it just sounds fancier. I don't know what.
Yeah, I say niche too.
Yes. So for us, we're really broad, meaning we literally do talk to everybody from, people who are just fine artists all the way up to like rock star guys to mostly CEOs and founders and people like this. But one way that has, I think, actually worked against us. I mean, I think as human beings, it's worked out more positive than negative. We've met a lot of really cool people across a really broad swath of walks of life. But I think the downside, and maybe you could speak to this a little bit on your own show, is, in the type of show that you guys run, which is you guys picked a really narrow vertical, which is still kind of broad if you really zoom in on it. But focused on creators and YouTube and all that stuff, right? So there's sort of like a thing you guys are developing expertise around, right? So if I was listening to your show, or if I was trying to become a creator on YouTube, your show would be perfect for me. What makes my show a little bit more challenging, or mine and Mike's show, is that the message kind of varies week to week. Like I say, there's this creative thread that runs through everybody. And if you pay any attention to the show, or if you've listened to multiple episodes, you'll detect it too. But if you're just trying to identify a show to listen to for business or whatever, you might look at our roster of people and be like, who are these guys? Like, who are they talking to? You know what I mean? So it's kind of an interesting thing. So what began as an expert or a exercise in trying to develop recognition or expertise around a subject has evolved into something that's really this really broad knowledge base that has helped us kind of start to, I guess, I don't know, distill what's real in the world, if that makes sense. Meaning everybody out there's got an opinion, and there's a million business books and there's a million whatevers, but I can tell you across 400 people what they're all doing. Right. Yeah. And so, it's funny. I hadn't really thought of it this way, but somebody compared what we're doing to Napoleon Hill and his famous book, Think and Grow Rich. So Think and Grow Rich is one of these crazy, famous business books. It was written in the 30s. Still relevant today, by the way. If you haven't read it, you should. And but basically what happened, Napoleon Hill went and interviewed the top 50 or top 500 most successful people of the time, and basically distilled that into a book, right? And so he met with the Carnegies and all the big names that of East Coast wealth, and over 20 years he met all these people, and then he assembled this book. And so we've kind of done the podcast version of that by accident, and as a result, we've created a lot of really cool content that I think is meaningful and actually does provide good direction for entrepreneurs and startup founders.
Yeah, that's talking about niches we could talk about that for the entire episode.
Well, I'll tell you one little thing before we move on niching. So what I think is really interesting about it is it's the maybe the top piece of business advice almost everybody wants to give you is, focus on a niche. You don't want to be too broad. You want to be more focused. And, of course, there are a million different points of view on this. But I will tell you, and maybe this is just the irony of the whole thing, and maybe you can speak to this too, being sort of a, quote, YouTube-focused show or a creator-focused show. At the first of the year, we relaunched, as I mentioned, our marketing agency is a consultancy for med device specifically. And but what we've learned is, so from being a generalist ad agency, which we were for the first 20 years, to moving into this quote unquote niche, there are 100 million layers inside med tech or med device. And if you take that up one step more and you go to med tech, it's even a million more. And so like we tried to be hyper specific and go into medical device technology specifically, but that means a million things. That could be, cardiovascular care or neurovascular care or pharma or whatever. I mean, it could be anything. And so I guess my point is, or, like if you're talking about niching, is like, there's almost no niche narrow enough, unless you're like the person who's, I don't know, maybe you're great at shoeing horses and you're just gonna have a video on this is how you shoe horses, and you're just gonna do that every week, which, I mean, fine. There's a niche right there. People might love, horsing or shoeing horses, but so I mean, I guess you can get narrow. But I guess my point is, even if you look at your show being a YouTube or creator specific show, it's still within YouTube. There's so many more verticals, right? You could be a very, very specific type of show. And so I think for a lot of people who are putting stress on themselves about niching or whatever, I mean, I think unless you have very hyper expertise in a very specific thing, don't beat yourself too much about it. Do the show that you love and try and have fun doing the show that you want and talk about the things that you're interested in, because you can almost never get small enough.
Yeah. I do think, from my experience interviewing YouTube creators, we've talked about niches quite a bit. And I do think there is a point where you can become too niche, like it's too specific. I can't name one off the top of my head, but for the most part, like you said, you don't need to worry too much about it. But you also don't want to be like too broad. Like uh, I can't remember what episode it was, but I talked to one creator, and you can be really broad if you're like one of the top creators, like Mr. Beast. He could do like whatever he wants just because he's Mr. Beast. But if you're a small creator, you do need to niche a little bit, but like you said, I don't think you need to worry too much about it. I think the main importance, at least from my eyes, is like making good quality content that you enjoy and that people want to watch, and eventually like your audience will find you.
Yeah, and I'll say that one downside to doing it the way we do it, so for people who are thinking about starting a show or something, is that a lot of our traffic is sort of dictated by the person on the show. So if the guest doesn't have a draw, then we're not easily Googleable. Right. So,
Yeah.
I mean, like, so if somebody's trying to just find a business advice podcast or something, maybe we come up in a directory or something like that. But the problem that we run into is just like if our guest isn't of good quality or isn't well known, maybe is a better way of saying it, then sometimes our numbers will suffer. There's a core group of eggs listeners out there. But, when we have somebody on that has a huge, presence online, whatever that may be, we obviously get a big spike as a result too. And that may be common across podcasts, but I've noticed that instead of growing at a consistent rate for us, a lot of it has to do with our booking.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty similar to us too. Like, some of our bigger creators, their episodes obviously do better. And then the people who are less known, the episodes don't do as well. But, at least for us, probably because we're so small, but, really sharing the episodes is really what, gets our views. So I don't know if like the business CEOs that you meet with, if they kind of share it with their network. Um, but for us, that's kind of how we get most of our views, is like by sharing the episodes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think some people do. Some of our guests are just, I mean, to be honest, they're just too busy to deal with this stuff. So they've either delegated it to a crew, or we have a number of agencies that book guests onto our show. So I presume they're doing the sharing. So definitely, I mean, sharing and spreading the word around is how we do it. I guess it's just kind of interesting because almost by design with eggs, and again, just going back to the root that we were trying to become subject matter experts, what we've actually kind of become are facilitators of other people's messages, to the extent that, I mean, it's within our frame and, we ask questions and, they're not just on our show vamping, but we don't pretend that the knowledge that's being shared is our knowledge. Right. We are making our guests the star. So when they come on and they share their knowledge, like we'll repurpose it and we'll share it. And I run it in our newsletter and in other places. But the content is always attributed to that person. It's not like, hey, now I'm a genius, instead it's no, I'm the facilitator that brought you the genius instead. And so it's interesting that, we started out kind of selfishly, which was, hey, we're going to be the subject matter expert and people are going to hire us to do public speaking and it's going to be great. And then what's actually happened is we've ended up, propping up our guests and putting them up in the spotlight instead. So I think it actually feels better. It's a little more natural for me. Like it's not my inclination to try and put myself out there in a way that makes me kind of the forefront or the center of attention. So for me, it's actually a little bit better. But for our guests, it's also better because the show's not about me. The show's about them.
Yeah. The more and more I talk with you, Ryan, about our shows, the more similarities I see.
Well, good. That must mean you were either both doing it right or we're both doing it right.
Yeah. So speaking of similarities, I know when I first met with you, for our listeners who may not know, I meet with the guests briefly beforehand just to kind of get to know them a little bit, and about their show. I believe you mentioned that you started as a podcast first and then moved to YouTube. And I'm curious what your thoughts are of like podcast platforms specifically versus YouTube. I know that YouTube is now the biggest podcast platform out there. I think just because it's YouTube. But I'm curious what your, I guess, like pros and cons are for podcast only versus like YouTube.
Sure. Well, so I think one of the things I'll point out is sort of like I'm just old enough that when I wanted to be on the internet as a kid, I had to learn to do some coding. Right. And so I didn't have, there's a period of my time pre-internet and a period of my life post-internet. And in that little window there, and, you know, a lot of people are experiencing this now with AI, kind of the before AI, and then you either grow or adapt or move with AI. And then later you'll either be really good at AI or you won't know anything and you'll be lost. And so, you know, and it was kind of like that with programming. Well, with podcasting, it wasn't so different. So we've been doing it long enough now. You know, like I say, coming on 9 or 10 years, I should probably do the math so I could give people a clear answer, but 9 or 10 years. And, but the landscape has moved a lot. So the reason we weren't on YouTube at the beginning is because back then, and I don't think it's this way anymore, but back then, YouTube would not allow you to upload footage more than an hour until you had a certain number of guests, or more than like 20 minutes maybe, until you had a certain number of subscribers. So like if you didn't have 500 subscribers or 1,000 or whatever the break was, they wouldn't allow you to upload footage that was longer than 20 minutes.
Oh, interesting.
And so for our show has always been structured as about an hour long show, right? Sometimes we go 45 minutes, sometimes we go an hour and 10, but it's always right in there. And so a 20-minute upload didn't work for us. So for the longest time, you know, and I don't know exactly what episode when we finally flipped the switch and got onto YouTube, but probably, you know, we might have been 80 or 100 episodes in or something by then. Maybe not that many, but something like that. And but what we discovered, or what ended up happening, and this was kind of our hack, was that they wouldn't let you upload more than 20 minutes, but they would let you live stream for free. And you could just live stream for up to 8 hours. So we set up initially a studio. We had a studio here in Salt Lake City. And in the studio, we had it rigged up for live streaming. And we would just sit our guests down, or we'd call them in on Zoom or whatever we were using at the time. Maybe Zencaster or something back then. I can't remember. But we would then just go live. And then we used something like, it's like OBS. I can't remember the brand name, but there's another one that was like a paid platform that was like OBS. But you could use that to put up on-screen graphics and things like that. So we tried to beef up our production a little bit by, you know, putting people's names on the screen. And, you know, we had 4 or 5 cameras in the room, so we could switch between our cameras and cut back to them.
Oh, nice.
To us. And we tried to do this whole live production, right? And our show is actually less complex now, which is interesting. But so we would just go live with the show. And so we've actually kind of honed that skill. I mentioned to you before we got on that, like, we don't really edit the show. Like, for the most part, unless there's a serious faux pas, somebody says something crazy, or like I mentioned to you, I went off the rails, just totally lost my trail of thought in a conversation this last week, and ended up cutting a line out. But generally speaking, we don't edit the show. And so, but this started because for our first however many episodes on YouTube, we had to go live. And it was the only way that we could get our show in its entirety online. So if you find those, the earliest shows that you can find of ours on YouTube will be from that studio setup. And you can actually see the camera switching and all that kind of stuff going on, because it was just live. And then, but we couldn't pull it down and edit it and then put it back up, because they wouldn't give us the hour. So if it wasn't good, it was just gone. So so that ended up being a real problem for us. So over time, you know, so that was kind of our foray into YouTube in the first place. But to answer your question about sort of pros and cons versus the platforms, so YouTube getting into the podcast game is a relatively recent thing, you know, like that's kind of new. But if you've had good hosts over the years, and we've used a couple that we've been pretty happy with, now we host with Spotify. But before that, we run another platform. I can't remember what it was called, one of the big ones, you know. And but what's really cool is those generate this RSS feed, and then you can syndicate your show everywhere. So our version of the show that shows up, we publish both the audio and video versions of the show on YouTube. But they're just being pushed over there by RSS feed from Spotify, right? So it doesn't require additional work. I should say Spotify only pushes audio podcast right now. So we have to manually load the video podcast. But you know, but generally speaking, and I think we can push it from Riverside actually, but we haven't done that yet. So anyway, but the point is that the line, I guess, like there used to be a lot more pros and a lot more cons, right? Because it was difficult to use a platform. If your platform wasn't big enough or established enough, it wouldn't have the features you needed, you know, things like this over the years that just, you know, the platforms have gotten better. But what's interesting is I think that the disparity between the YouTube as a platform and the podcast platforms has gotten much smaller. We've referenced Zencaster, which we're using now to tape this. On our show, we use one called Riverside. And these products have really blurred the line between what a podcast platform is and a video creation platform and all this stuff. Because now you can do most of your editing in the cloud. You can do almost all your production and push things to wherever, like we publish directly to Spotify from Riverside, and it pushes our video file up and our audio version and all that stuff. I mean, it's super slick. And so, as far as pros and cons, I guess my only real thing would be that choosing either a podcast specific platform or a, platform like YouTube specifically might limit what you can do. But I think if you use YouTube as your podcast host, for example, I think they'll generate an RSS feed too, and you can shop it around the same way that we do using Riverside, and Shopify, or Spotify. So we use Spotify's RSS feed to, feed Apple Music and, the Google Play Store and, whatever million other directories that our stuff goes into.
Yeah. I guess my main purpose for this question is, YouTube is like this, I think it's the second best search engine in the world. Whereas podcast platforms, I feel like don't have that same discoverability. And so, like the features, like you mentioned, that's a good point. And luckily they're getting, the disparity, like you said, is getting smaller and smaller. But I think the discoverability is interesting. And, we could probably talk about this all day long, but, I now know Spotify can do video. And I'm sure, I think Apple Podcasts also just added video fairly recently. And I'm curious if the podcast platforms are going to start adding more of a search element, kind of like YouTube does. But it's interesting because I feel like, Spotify I associate with music and I don't know. Yeah, as a consumer, I feel like they're conflicting mediums. But
well, and it's funny to that point too. I mean, me and Mike chose Spotify because we're music guys, and so we love music, so we went to Spotify. Because that just happens to be the platform we listen to music on too. Now, I listen to most of my podcasts, like other people's shows and stuff, on Spotify as well. So, but that just is my workflow, right? Like if you were a podcast specific consumer, Apple still, I think, has a podcast app, that's just for podcasts. And now you can use YouTube, and they're starting to build podcasting in. I think my only pushback, or it's not even a pushback, just a comment, is, on YouTube, I mean, you're dead right about searchability. I mean, basically that alone trumps every podcast platform that I'm aware of. They might push your feed out, and maybe that's getting aggregated or crawled by somebody, but it's probably being crawled by Google, and Google is feeding YouTube and all that stuff. So I mean, so they definitely have the I guess the corner on the market as far as search goes. And I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, if podcasting is doing well for them, and I don't follow the YouTube news that close, so I don't know if they're loving the way that people are podcasting on their platforms. But if I were companies like Zencastr and Riverside and people like that, I'd be real worried about YouTube pushing further into that game. Because if it got to the point, and maybe it's already there, I just haven't explored it. But I mean, if it gets to the point where YouTube can basically accomplish what I'm doing with Riverside or whatever, and it's lower cost, or they favor me in the algorithm because I use their platform or whatever, I don't think, I think it'd be pretty challenging to make a case to stay with some of these other providers. And Riverside, awesome product. Zencastr, awesome product. We've actually had the host of, or the creator of Zencastr on our show before. So I mean, big advocates for their platforms, and we shout it from the mountaintops right now. But I don't think it would be totally unreasonable to think that those positions could be sort of usurped by an aggressive YouTube if they really wanted to.
Yeah, that is super interesting to think about. That would be crazy if YouTube added a feature where you could record, edit, and publish with an RSS feed to everywhere.
Yeah.
That would be well, insane.
And maybe they start running into monopoly problems or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But one thing in particular, so I ran into this just last night with Riverside. So we're in the process right now of creating an online course for business leaders. And the idea is that basically you can take this course, and it'll take you basically from startup and how to form your business and how to manage your money and all that stuff all the way through to exit. And so, but just like we talked about at the top of the show, we're leveraging the knowledge of these 460 CEOs that we've talked to build a coursework that's sort of vetted by humans, right? We're doing our own version of Napoleon Hill.
Mhm.
So we've been working on that. So in Riverside, I was hopeful I could just sit and read my transcripts. And in full transparency, just for anybody who tries, I did try to like train 11 labs to do my voice. And it's
Oh, yeah.
dangerously close because I thought, oh, well, maybe I could just feed it through the system and let it record everything for me and then I'll do the editing. But I found that it's very good and it's a great product. I mean, if that's what you need, it's great. But I found that it still sort of sucks the life out of it. It doesn't sound enough like me, and so I'm going to end up recording all these things live. So I went into Riverside last night because I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe I could put up a slide deck and then just speak to the slide deck because I'm not really doing video. I'm just doing voiceover over slides.
Mhm.
And so it turns out Riverside has that as a service. You can do
Mhm.
presentations on there now
Oh,
if
wow.
you subscribe to their biggest, most expensive plan.
Uh,
So this is among the lowest grade needs of something like this, right? I mean, if you were, you can literally record voice into PowerPoint. You know, like
yeah.
you don't need to use a platform at all. But for Riverside to tier that, and this is where I think Riverside is starting to make some mistakes in their subscription plans, is the types of features that they're burying in their team plans or their business plans, which I think can be $400 or $500 a month. Like I don't know exactly what they cost, but I think they can be very costly. But
Mhm.
these are very rudimentary features. You could just buy a copy of of Camtasia or something and do it if you wanted to. Or
Yeah.
there's a lot of
Yeah.
things you could do it with that would do the same job for no money. So it's interesting that ends up being one of their things. But that got me thinking last night about, what platforms might have that, right? And so let's say that
Mhm.
YouTube decided to enter the space. There's a lot of content on YouTube that's people voiceover slides and stuff like that. Like it would make sense for them to include a feature like being able to speak to a presentation. You can probably do
Mhm.
it in Google Slides now and publish to YouTube. I don't know, but I'm guessing you could maybe do that now. And so I just thought that was a really interesting thing, which is that, there is room in the market for somebody to show up with a couple key features that I think, would get people to start questioning their loyalty to their platforms.
Yeah. 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 The market could change quite a bit. I think YouTube will always stay number one just because it's associated with Google. But,
It'd be
you
pretty hard to
know,
push them off the hill at this point.
yeah. Yeah. I want to add one more thought, I guess, to the conversation. I was thinking about this the other day, but with Spotify adding video and Apple Podcasts adding video, I know Twitter or X, they were for a period of time they were like focusing on video. I feel like as all these platforms are kind of, I feel like they're all starting to mesh into one. Like they're all wanting to become like the same thing, and I'm like, I feel like there needs to be significant differences between them. Like YouTube needs to just stay YouTube. Like I don't need every feature on every platform. It's okay to have multiple platforms. I
Yeah,
feel
it's the
like.
just because you could do something, should you do something?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I understand why they're doing it though, because like people like those features. It makes sense from a business standpoint. But as a consumer, I'm like, come on. So cool. Well, we could talk about that all day long, but let's go ahead and move on. How many episodes have you said that you've done?
Yeah, so we just launched actually today as we're taping this on Thursday. We publish every Thursday. So episode 461 went out today.
Oh, okay, awesome. That's a lot of episodes.
Yeah, well,
Would
and
you?
it's one a week, so it's 461 weeks of podcasting basically.
Oh, gotcha. Nice. So, would you say there is like a favorite episode or video podcast that you've done since doing this show? Is there one that kind of stands out to you?
As far as like my favorite episodes, it's pretty tough to pin one down. Obviously, we've done a ton of shows, so it's hard to know exactly because there's a lot of shows that I like for various reasons. We've done some
Hmm.
really long shows with friends. One that's, it's kind of interesting. I have my co-host Mike will sometimes work in Alaska in the summers, and he met this old timer, miner guy. Like he just was a gold miner and lives up in Nome, Alaska. Put this guy on the podcast and he talked for 6 hours. And so we have one 6 hour episode of this guy just explaining, mining and all that kind of stuff in that whole industry. And it's really interesting stuff. But it's a little niche, you've got to be into mining if you really want to hear
Yeah.
it. But we also had some guys that were on, there was a Discovery Channel show called Bering Sea Gold. We had a couple guys on from, and those guys made the introduction to this miner. So it was kind of an interesting thing. So, but I think probably, I don't know if you're okay with it. I'll give you a few.
Yeah, no, that's totally
So,
great.
so the first couple I'll kind of lump together. So we had the singer or one of the singers of a band called Space Hog on the show, and the other singer of a band called EMF on the show. So it's Anthony Langdon is the one guy, and James Atkin is the EMF dude. And we had this really incredible conversation, especially with James Atkin about EMF, because, you know, we're a business show. And so even though he's a rock star and he's on to talk about his music and the things that they're doing, and they were on tour at the time, our conversation was this whole thing about basically treating EMF like a family run business, right? Their family is the band and they're trying to run the business that is EMF. And, you know, I mean, they haven't been famous for a long time, even though their song is still very relevant, but their business has evolved from, you know, they're older guys now. So it's like, instead of touring and stuff like that, it's more the management of the IP that they created when they were children, you know? And so was kind of an interesting story. So he actually, when they came through Salt Lake, he kind of pulled me aside and was talking to me about it. And he's like, man, I never thought about it like as a business at all. Like, he's like, no, we're just musicians and we make music. That's kind of our thing, you know? So, so I thought that was really cool insight, and that made that episode really cool. Also, Anthony, who was the guy from Space Hog. I'm a little young for Unbelievable from EMF, but Space Hog's hit was called In the Meantime, and that one hit right in the middle of my teenage years. So that one was actually really important to me, and it was really cool to not only have a conversation with these guys. I mean, who did he date? One of these, it's not Heidi Klum, but somebody like Heidi Klum. Like I mean, just, you know, the rock star life of this guy is crazy. You know, his brother, the other singer, Roy Langdon, is married to Steve Tyler from Aerosmith's daughter. So it's like, you know, it's like rock royalty guys, you know, so it's very cool. And so, but they played through Pocatello or through Salt Lake City, and I got to hear that too. So that was pretty fun. But if I had to kind of pin down one that's probably been, let's call it the most closing the loop kind of show of all time. So in terms of like accomplishing something that I thought was very cool, we had this guy on the show. His name's Bob Berg, and Bob is famous for this book called The Go-Giver. And The Go-Giver is basically one of these, you know, perennially famous business books, but it's about basically giving more than you receive. It's just this parable about, you know, how in business it's better to give more, you know, than you expect from other people, basically, and wildly successful. And he agreed to come on the show and give us 30 minutes, and which is actually the shortest show I've ever done. So it was a little bit of an anomaly because it was such a short show, but nonetheless, it's proven to be very impactful. But what's interesting is years and years and years ago, when I was like 18, I used to run girls fast pitch softball tournaments in Pocatello, Idaho, where I'm from. And I got into that because there was a big event called the Simplot Games, and they had a girls softball division. And my girlfriend, then now wife, played fast pitch softball. Well, Simplot decided they're not going to do girls fast pitch anymore. So I said, okay, fine, I'll run one. And so we started the softball league, or this softball tournament every year. It was called the Summer Slam, and it was brought to you by Standard Inc., which was my clothing company at the time. And so we ran these softball tournaments, and I met this guy. I was trying to figure out how to do better sales and stuff like that. I'd never worked in sales, and I didn't know what I was doing. And my mom is a school teacher up there. She had a student whose father was a radio executive. And so he was willing to sit down with me and just talk about, you know, doing sales and how I could maybe improve my sales. So I sat down with that guy, and I still remember sitting across the table from him, and he told me this, or gave me this notion that is, people do business with those they know, like, and trust. And so that's become, as we talk about it on Eggs, or whenever I bring it up, it's always, you know, people have to know you, like you, trust you. Right. So the idea is that, you know, those are the types of folks that people do business with, are the people they know, like, and trust, which makes a lot of sense. So I didn't find out until some years later, maybe 10 or 15 years later, that phrase comes from Bob Berg's book, and other business people have said variations of it or whatever. But the version that I got came from Bob Berg's book. So way back then, you know, whatever this is, I'm now 25 or something. I was on LinkedIn, and I just shot him a random note. Just said, hey man, you know, I just wanted to shoot you a note and say thank you. You know, this little parable or this little thought that you put out into the world, you know, it was really helpful to me then when I needed it. It's kind of stuck with me forever. I still use it today, you know, and that was 20 years ago now. You know, so I mean, it's that old. And And so, and the man, he jumps on and he actually responded to me, and we went back and forth a couple rounds and just kind of visited and stuff. And but ultimately I just was able to thank him for putting that together and publishing something like that. And so years later, and this was just this last year, we had the opportunity in July to meet with Bob and talk to him about the show, and actually got to thank him in person for that, and reminded him of this old, LinkedIn conversation, and we put it up on screen and shared it with them and all this stuff. And so it was really fun. But so that's probably, maybe it sounds dumb to have that be one of my favorite things, given it took all these years to get to it. But nonetheless, it's probably one of the most memorable things, just in the sense that it's got more history than almost anything.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I love hearing creators' stories and what like their favorite video or project or episode is, because you get to hear things like that. I actually haven't heard that phrase before. You should give more.
Yeah, I would encourage anybody to check out that book, The Go-Giver. It's cheap, it's short, it's easy to read. But I think in general, whether you're in business or customer service or working for the man, whatever it is, or even as a creator, this is something we try and think about a lot as a creator, which is, giving value to people, right? That's the whole game. People are tuning into you because they're getting value from you, whether it's, being transmitted through YouTube or it's, physical in-person, value. Nonetheless, that's what you're doing. And so I think it's a really good read for creators, business people, everybody alike. But yeah, the whole notion of people will do business with those they know, like, and trust, I think is, it's a good, like, sort of, I don't know, just thing to put in your back pocket and live by.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. So thanks again for sharing that. I've got just a couple more questions for you this episode. We've talked with a lot of creators who have different sized communities. We've had people who have had less than 500 subscribers, and creators who have like almost 1 million. And creators, a big way that they make their money is through brand deals. And one guy in particular had an interesting brand deal situation that didn't go quite as he expected, and it was a really interesting story. And so I'm just wondering if you have had any interesting brand deals with your show, either good or bad.
Yeah. Well, we're funny because, so like we've discussed, we started the show selfishly, so to speak. That was just, hey, we're going to put our voices out into the world and people will love it. Then we evolved to sharing everybody else's voice. And there's something, at least in my opinion, and maybe I'm making this too bold, but it's a little bit selfless to share other people's opinions and put them out there, right? So you're really putting the onus on somebody that isn't you, right? We're doing all the work. We're, publishing the show. We're building artwork for it. We're trying to, keep all the lights on around here. And so it never felt good to either Mike or I to really try and commercialize the show. Over the years, we've tried a few things, like we'll have a guest on the show that has a cool product and maybe they'll give it to us for free. So we'll put their logo on the thing. Or when we had our podcast studio in town, for example, he gave us a little bit of a discount on rent. In exchange, we put, his, it was inside a co-working space. So we put their co-working logo on our artwork for a while. So there's a few things like that where we've tried to kind of dabble, but we've never really traded cash for brand until recently. And so this last year, we interviewed this woman. She runs a company called Taylor Style. So, and Anya is her name. Anya Chang runs Taylor Style, and Taylor it's Taelor for anybody that's looking it up. So Taylor Style is kind of like a clothes renting type service. It's kind of like a Stitch Fix or something like that, except for the clothes are rental. So basically you use them and then return them. And you can buy them, keep them if you want. Sometimes what you'll get are brand new, but sometimes they've been laundered and you're rewearing clothes. So for some people that might seem weird, but I will just tell you as somebody who's been using their product for a while, it's great. Everything's clean. It smells awesome. Like there's no problems. So if it seems a little weird to be wearing rental clothing, but nonetheless,
you probably don't do underwear though. Right?
Yeah, no underwear, no headwear. It's just mostly jeans and shorts and shorts and stuff like that. But I found the product to be really cool. And so we had Anya Chang come on the show to talk about it. Anya is a really established business person. She's like one of the top CEOs out in California. This company is growing like crazy. Like she's doing some amazing things. But after we did our show with her, she enjoyed the experience so much that she reached out to us and asked if we wanted to be brand ambassadors for her. Mike didn't have a lot of interest in doing that himself. It's just not really his jam. But I told him that, I'd be interested in doing that. So we brokered a deal, basically, put together a contract, a certain number of episodes, all that stuff. And actually now we're into our second contract, which is cool. Things are going good. And so they started sending me clothes and I started talking about it on the show, and we just run it as an ad at the beginning. We're probably too new to have too terrible of experience. So far, they've done everything they said they'd do. They pay on time, all that kind of stuff. So we've been very happy as a ambassador for them. And I think they've been happy with the people that we drive to them, and hopefully they're making some sales. I hope they're doing really well. Use promo code eggs and save 25% off. And so, but no, it's been, so far I would say, it's not very exciting in that, we don't have some like crazy house on fire kind of moment with them, but nonetheless, we've been very thrilled, but it literally took us 9 years to do it. So the point I might make around brand deals is I think maybe more a deal or more a matter of intentionality with your show. So if you're a creator, like, I don't think it's inherently bad to have sponsors. I don't think it's inherently bad to sell time or sell opportunity and things like that, as long as you're transparent and, people understand when you're selling and when you're not and stuff like that. I think it's important. But generally speaking, I think for us, we were a little nonchalant in doing commercialization. We both had our other businesses. We both stayed busy, stuff like that. So we didn't need the show for money. And so as a result, we never really prioritized that highly. However, that has led to my wife calling it a hobby for almost a decade now. And that rubs me wrong every time she says it. So I was thrilled to death when we did finally get a brand deal, because I could go back to my wife and be like, see, now we're making money. Now we've got money. And so now we're transitioning out of hobby after almost a decade.
That's awesome. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. That's great to hear that you finally got your first brand deal.
Yeah, and like I say, it's been a really good experience. And these guys are based in San Francisco, and it's a good product for business people and professionals, and it's a cool thing. So yeah, we've been really happy with it.
Yeah, someday for our show, Creators Uncut, we'll be able to get some sponsors, kind of the same way that you did.
Yeah, around the point I was trying to make was just that, I think if you're intentional about it, this could happen much sooner for people. I've met shows that are a lot younger than ours that are, maybe even have less audience than we do, that do pretty well, in the defense of Taylor Style, for example, they haven't once asked us how many people view their episodes or whatever. Like, so many of these advertisers are looking for like a cost per million or, whatever. They'll pay you only if it sees a certain, number of thousands of people or whatever, and Taylor, maybe it's just because of the stage of the business they're in and they're really just trying to get eyes on right now. They have not asked a single question about that. They liked us, they liked the show, they liked the experience. And so they decided to support us. And so, so they may be a little bit of a diamond in the rough, or maybe a little rare as people are looking for traditional sponsors. But to that end, I would encourage people to look around for sponsors that maybe aren't as easy to find. So it's pretty easy to find, these, what do they call them? Like affiliate programs and things like that, where you could start selling something. We did some of that early on. Like we tried with Audible and some of these other ones that were popular with podcasters back then. And, but we didn't have the audience for that. We couldn't drive, 100 million people to Audible, so we couldn't make any money. And so, yes, we were sponsored by Audible, but I mean, for what? It didn't do anything. And so, so those ones that I think are a little bit easier to do, where you get to avoid the sales conversation or convincing somebody of the value that you're sharing with them that would make it worth it to them or their business. Like if you get to avoid all those steps, I would say, generally speaking, those types of customers or those types of brand deals are going to be looking strictly at your metrics, which means you better be good and you better be big and you better have a lot of people. And, it's just that works for some people. And if you've got a big audience, then maybe that's great. But I think that even at smaller sizes, there's this guy, Kevin Kelly, that espouses this notion of the 1,000 true fans. And the idea is that basically if you have 1,000 people that will just buy everything you do, so whether you're a rock band or you're a business or whatever, if you've got 1,000 people that'll buy everything you do, that's all you need. Like that'd be enough to run your whole life. And so I think to that end, or to use that as a metaphor for, your show or whatever, you don't need 10 million subscribers. You don't need 100 million subscribers. So for people who are putting so much pressure or thinking that maybe their show isn't as good as they think it is because they don't have giant numbers, that may not be that important, as long as what they're actually delivering is what we've talked about a few times, which is value. So as long as you care about your audience, they begin to know, like, and trust you, they'll buy the things that you care about. And then you don't really need an enormous audience. And so you shouldn't fall into the trap of trying to only work with sponsors that care about your cost per million or your ROI guarantees or whatever. I mean, everybody would love that, sure. And if I could have Audible as a sponsor and they were just paying me a grip of cash because I could send millions of people to their site every week, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
But the reality isn't that. But we're providing real value to Taylor, even at a much lower ROI. And they're still willing to take a chance on our show because they believe that too.
Yeah.
So that makes them a better partner for us. That makes them, a better partner, I think, for a lot of creators. And so I would just sort of say, if the road's too easy, if you can sign up online for your sponsorship deal, just don't bother. Go find yourself something else. Go find, talk to your neighbor, talk to the local pharmacist, talk to whomever owns a business that and support those guys. And they will sort of support your small business just the same way you might support theirs.
Yeah. Yeah. And to add on to that, one of the creators we had at the beginning of our show, he kind of did that exact thing that you said. He just asked people, and he's like, the worst thing that they can say is no. So, might as well give it a shot and ask people to sponsor. And you kind of, like you said, help each other out.
Yeah. Well, and to be honest, it doesn't have to be huge money at first either, right?
Right.
I mean, for a small business in town, if you could say, well, my friends, my family, a handful of other people are going to listen. I've maybe got 100 people in town that are going to be listening. But for $25, dude, you could run an ad on my show and it'll be awesome, or whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be, this giant 6-figure deal or something, it could be as simple as, just little $25 spots to local creators or something. And people can afford that. So so they'll participate. As you get bigger and, time becomes, more limited or something like that, or maybe you don't have the bandwidth to work with people, then you start charging more. But when you're just starting off, or if you're looking to get into brand deals really early before you've got giant metrics, then I think that's a much better way to go, and probably how I would inform the 10 years younger version of me if I was starting a show again today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know for the bigger creators out there where maybe the metrics do matter a little bit more, YouTube now has a feature, I think it's called Brand Connect. They may have changed the name, but basically it packages, it looks at your YouTube analytics and packages it for you. And so you can share that automatically with brands that are looking for sponsors. So that might be more for the bigger creators, but I just thought I'd throw that out there. So
yeah, because I think even on YouTube even now, I think until you have 1,000 subscribers on there, I don't think you can even monetize your show or anything like that.
It's now 500, but
is it? Okay, so I think you can do some things, but but I mean, our channel admittedly has only got about 500 followers on it, but we do much better on the podcast platforms, but we've just been there longer.
Yeah.
And so, but, and we don't, in all honesty, we don't put a ton of energy into our YouTube show, but it's, because we're a production team of 1 or 2, Mike, if he can help, but usually me. And so some of it's just a byproduct of not having the time to invest. But just to tie in the brand deal thing, the brand deal, especially if it continues on after this round, it's not significant money, but it's enough money that we could hire a little helper to help start spreading the word a little more on social media and start spreading the word a little more on YouTube, and working on getting our, summaries active, enhanced or made better so that we can drive a little better traffic, or work on our SEO a little bit, or, pick out keywords, that kind of stuff, all the things that we're just kind of leaving off. And we try to be pretty good about it, but sometimes it's just, we just go fast and sometimes we don't, so we haven't gone real heavy on YouTube in terms of trying to make it our place, right? It's kind of the same nonchalant attitude we started our show with. And so, so hopefully over time, our YouTube channel will grow. I think, like I say, the show provides real value. So I think when people start digging into it, they'll enjoy it, and that'll help. But good to know, because we just crossed our 500 threshold. Maybe we can go monetize now.
Yeah. So you need 500 subscribers, and then I think it's 4,000 watch hours, which I think personally is the more difficult one to achieve. So, but yeah, they made it slightly easier for creators, which is nice. But I do wonder why they require a minimum. Maybe it's just to verify that you're actually putting the effort in. But
That's my
you
guess. And
know,
I heard a stat once, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but there's some statistic, and it's like almost like businesses. They say like what 1 in 10 businesses survive or something like that. Like
mhm,
podcasting's kind of like that. I mean, there's like
yeah,
500,000 podcasts or something now, like some giant number. But like most podcasts don't get past, I think it was 8 episodes. And
yeah,
so it's like, so for people to really take it serious, like, I mean, by the time you're getting to the kind of numbers we're putting up, like, even if we're not the biggest show on the planet, like, we're still a rarefied air. You know what I mean? Like, there's,
mhm,
the big dogs have that kind of history, but not most people.
yeah, yeah. Definitely. Well, Ryan, I appreciate you being on the show. We've had some great thoughts and insights. I've got one final question for you, and we kind of ask this to all of our creators that we have on the show. I think it provides some good, all I can think of is insights for our listeners. But has there been a mistake you've made throughout, creating your podcast show that you've learned from that maybe our viewers could benefit hearing your kind of story?
Sure. And I think we've covered a couple of them kind of closely. So I'll just reinforce those, which is basically one, I think be intentional, right? So we started the show, like I say, I mean, we were intentional, but we were maybe intentional in the wrong ways. And we
Mhm.
didn't treat it like a business even really until this year when we first took our first sponsor, right? That's the first time we were trading money for time, right? So, I mean, I
Mhm.
mean, I guess it officially became a business then, even though it's been IP that we've been leveraging for a lot of years. And so, so I would say sort of be intentional with what your product is. And part of that, I think, will help you set expectations. If we had set out for a show that we planned to make huge, that we thought would generate a ton of money, replace our income, whatever our goals were, we probably would have approached it differently than this nonchalant attitude where it's like, well, I run my business and Mike runs his business and we're just, we're doing this for fun for us and, that kind of thing. Like if we had approached it
Mhm.
more like, okay, we need a business, we need this to be successful. If I'm going to commit time to it, it's got to be awesome. If we did come at it from that direction, I think that level of intentionality would have steered the show. And for some creators, it's not going to be about, getting commercial success or whatever. Maybe it's just the way they share their, crocheting techniques or whatever it is.
Mhm.
So I don't think that the idea is that you must lean into being commercial. Rather, it's, if you're interested in being commercial, go into it with that mindset because I think that'll help. So that was one of the big things that we didn't do. We talked a little bit at the top about niching. I guess you could argue whether or not it's a mistake to niche down or not. But from our point of view, I think we probably could have grown further faster if we had narrowed our scope a little bit. In the very beginning, a lot of our guests were designers and graphic design type people and stuff like that, folks that I knew from my world. And so it was like low hanging fruit. It was like, who could I call that I know? You know what I mean? And so a lot of our early guests were kind of, I mean, they're creative people, they're designers and stuff, but they weren't CEOs and founders and stuff like, so we were claiming to be a business show, but we weren't doing that much business for a while. You know what I mean? It wasn't until much later when we started getting into better guests or more professional guests, I'll say, that had sort of business perspectives for us. So that's when things started to gel a little bit. So I guess that could be considered a mistake, but again, maybe that circles back to intentionality, which is, do you want to be a show that does X? Then you need to act accordingly, that kind of thing. So I think those are probably the two biggest faux pas. I mean, some of it more broadly would just be like, I wish we'd have taken it more serious longer, but I think that's still kind of intentionality. So maybe that's the leave behind.
Gotcha. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's well said, and I hope that our viewers and listeners, take that into account if they're starting a channel or a show, or if you already have a YouTube channel. Maybe you can pivot a little bit based on what you heard in this episode. So, Ryan, thank you so much for being on this show. It's been great having you and hearing kind of your stories and insights. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time, man. And if you don't mind, can I just kind of leave people a little bit of where they can follow up with me?
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
Cool. All right. So just a couple quick things and I'll just spout them off. So if you take time, you might have to pause and write them down or something. You can do one at a time, but I'll just give you a couple URLs where you can learn more about me and what we're doing. So Rogue Health is our main company. We help medtech companies identify what's actually blocking their commercialization. So before they raise, launch, or scale, we do structured external diagnostics that help leadership make decision grade decisions, help them get to a spot where they can actually identify gaps in their commercial story and fix them. So you can learn more about Rogue Health over at roguehealth.com. It's ROGHEALTH.com, just roguehealth.com. The podcast, like we've been talking about all episode, is just eggsthepodcast.com. We actually do have a separate website that's just eggscast.com, but it's just basically an aggregator of our YouTube channel. So if you go to eggsthepodcast, all one word.com, that will take you to our YouTube channel, and you can start to catch up with the show there. We're also available on every major podcast platform. My personal website, where you can learn about sort of me, my philosophy in business, and check out some of the art that I create and things like that, you can check out over at ryanroghaar.com. And if you only remember any of these, I should probably spell that out, ryanroghaar.com. It's RyanRoghaar.com. And then maybe the one place, and maybe this is the only link I should really be giving, is sort of my link tree that will get you to all those other places. So it's just, the URL is just rogha.ar. So if you go to rogha.ar, you can basically connect with us in business, writing, pay attention to our new courses, follow the newsletters, all kinds of things. So check it out.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Ryan, for being on the show. And thanks to our viewers and listeners for checking out this episode. Make sure to like and subscribe for more creator insights and content like this. And a little bit of plug for ourselves. If you need help creating your videos for your YouTube channel, feel free to check us out at creatorlux.com. And we'll see you in the next one.